has the law changed in recent years, and what are the effects on lesbians?
The law on change of legal gender in 2016 in Norway was the trigger. And to think that men, whatever they identify as, are not or cannot become lesbians suddenly became hateful and prejudiced. And I think lesbians are a threat to the queer community's gender ideology, because if men cannot be lesbians, they cannot be women, because some women are lesbians. So also because we are like, they see us as part of the rainbow family. They want us, they demand that we are going to stand united together. And any lesbian who protests and say that men cannot be or become lesbians are, they are becoming hate objects. In Norway, what used to be an organization for lesbian and gay changed its course and became an organization for people who support surrogacy and polygamy. And it's also against the Nordic model of prostitution. And as I see it, the agenda changed from supporting same-sex relationships to becoming a project that primarily works for increased access to other people's bodies and facilitate a culture of abuse. And if lesbians react and are critical of this agenda, they are, as I said many times now, demonized and hated. Because all people under the LGBT umbrella are expected to be supportive and not speak up and oppose our own. My own people are women, not queers, is my answer to that. But they are also trying to get new laws also in Norway, which actually will lead to that it is criminal to speak up. So we are trying to fight this. They are working to make it criminal to say the things that actually are true.
The part of the law that I've just been looking at recently is the anti-discrimination legislation in Australia, where and there's a vilification section in that legislation, and there are a number of grounds on which you can claim that you have been vilified. One of which is gender identity or transgender. But there's no ground for sex. So a transgender bloke can claim that he's being vilified by, as Tonje said, telling the truth. But no woman can claim that she is being vilified. I can remember I used to work at the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board in the early 1980s, and there was a discussion about whether or not sex should be included in the anti-discrimination, the vilification section of the anti-discrimination legislation. And it was eventually decided that it wouldn't be included because there is so much vilification of women that if you had it in the legislation, it would destroy the economy. And I'm not quite sure what the connection is between destroying the economy and putting sex in the vilification section. And it would always be sex anyway. It wouldn't be, they wouldn't allow us to say women or female sex. It has to be the general one, which includes men as well. It would be able to be used by men who would complain that they were being vilified by presumably feminism, because they complain about that already. The other one is the being able to change your birth certificate, which to me is just mind-blowing. You're supposed not to tell lies on birth certificates, and yet if you say, if you're a man and you say you were born female, it's a lie. but I don't know, the lawyers don't seem to have seen that. So that's happened in a couple of Australian states. It's not in New South Wales yet, I don't think. Although there is something about passports. You have to change your birth certificate if you want to change your passport. It's not specifically about lesbians. It's in fact, I mean, it's in fact a problem for the whole society.
The law is a mixed bag in the United States. On the one hand, we've made some gains when it comes to things like marriage equality and protection against employment discrimination, mostly through Supreme Court decisions. About 20 of our 50 states have lesbian and gay civil rights laws that are very important for lesbians in terms of employment and housing, things like that. And recently, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision that found sexual orientation was a form of sex discrimination under our employment discrimination laws. And the same decision also found transgender status as a form of sex discrimination under the same law, which in the specific facts of the case was not a problem, but of course the concern is it will be taken farther than that and expand the right of trans self-ID in future cases. And then a few weeks ago, our court gives and then takes away the next minute. They issued new rulings that recognize broad religious exemptions to civil rights laws, so that basically you have a right not to be discriminated against unless the person who's discriminated against you has a moral or a religious objection to your person, who you are, being a lesbian, in which case they can. So this is basically they're eating up the exception is eating up the rule. Meanwhile, gender self-ID has been incorporated into state non-discrimination laws in many states, and this is particularly the case in California, which protects gender identity. And California has not just the statute, but has regulations to interpret the statute, which specifically says that trans-identified employees must be able to use facilities at work that correspond to their gender identity, and that they need not comply with the dress codes if inconsistent with their gender identity or expression. Basically, you're required to use pronouns. So that's in the state regulations of this under the state law. The dress code thing is kind of interesting because you have gender identity and gender expression, and the gender identity part, we really don't want dress codes, but of course we're concerned about gender identity as a concept. The gender expression, though, would allow for any gender nonconforming person, anyone who doesn't want to comply with the dress codes for this, based on your sex, to be able to do that without discrimination. That's a good thing. So it's a mixed bag, but both the religious rights erosion of civil rights by creating a big hole the size of a Mack truck into the law, as well as the gender identity, which is really making it very unpleasant at work, potentially very dangerous for anyone to be able to speak out or to ever say anything to anybody because you might say the wrong thing.
In 2018, a bill on gender self-ID was presented by the Unidas Podemos party, which is a left-wing party. In it, the concepts of gender identity and gender expression were incorporated, and for example, mother was replaced by pregnant parent. The law that was established in Spain until now, from 2007, was conceived under the narrative of traditional transsexuality, of people who were born in the wrong bodies and who had gender dysphoria. The healthcare system had to provide them their sexual identity in all official identification documents after 2 years of hormonal therapy and what they call real-life test. The Ministry of Equality recently announced that the trans law will be voted on in the coming weeks, and most likely it will end up being approved despite the late and slight resistance of the socialist Carmen Calvo and other women in the Socialist Party and in some activist groups. The Socialist Party itself is divided regarding this issue. The approval of this law will mean erasing women and making lesbian reality invisible, reducing it to an innate sexual orientation towards gender that can also be adopted by men who identify as women, in addition to ending all spaces reserved for women and lesbians.
The main law relating to lesbian rights in Italy was a civil union law passed 4 years ago. It was something for which the homosexual movement had fought for years, but its approval marked the opening of a division in the movement. In particular, we in Arci Lesbica found ourselves at odds with our former allies who went for a neoliberal position. In Italy, we do not have a self-ID for trans people, but a proposal has been prepared. At the moment, there is a bill in Parliament regarding anti-discrimination, which unfortunately uses a concept of gender identity. We are doing all we can to have it changed. It is difficult to know what the outcome will be, but we will do our best to stop it. The problem in Italy is that now leftist people and queer people who used to be on the left have lost vision and are buying into liberal individualistic ideas. Every desire is considered a right to be demanded. For instance, gay couple want to have children, so they go for room for rent, as if being a parent was a right. It is a right of each child to have someone to take care of her, but is only a desire for an adult to have a child. The state or women in general have no duty to provide the children on demand. The same is happening with so-called sexual assistance for disabled. Of course, disabled people should be able to sexual life, but not the right to have a woman at their disposal to be bought and raped, no more than non-disabled men have the right to rape prostituted women. Sexual assistance, who is being asked, is for the disabled. The sexual assistance for the disabled is simply a good marketing facade for the regulation of prostitution. In Italy, prostitution is not illegal. Exploitation of the prostitution is. So demanding the decriminalization for the so-called sex work in Italy only means to make a big favor to the people running the sex industry. We call all these requests false rights. It is really bad to see a movement which has been a liberation movement for quite a few years to become so neoliberal and actually reactionary at the expense of women, because it is always at the expense of women.